Hey guys, welcome to another episode of U.S. History with Lennox, and today we are back in the age of Jackson. This is our third video covering Andrew Jackson and his presidency. If you've missed the first two, you might want to go back and check them out. But otherwise, let's press on. Now, one reason we're making so many videos about Andrew Jackson is because there were so many controversies during his presidency. In fact, the whole second video I made was all about Jackson and his controversies. And that's what this one's about too. There were just so many of them. Honestly, what Jackson is probably most known for is what happened with his relationship with the Native Americans. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830, and this was signed and pushed by Andrew Jackson. You see, in the United States in 1830, we're seeing a huge population surge. Compare the map of 1790 to that of 1830. There on the left, you can see where the majority of the tax-paying U.S. citizens were living. Now recognize that these are tax-paying U.S. citizens that are shown on these maps. It doesn't include Native Americans. It doesn't include slaves either. Now look at the map on the right in 1830, and you can see that the U.S. population is definitely moving west. Well, what's driving that move west? Why are we expanding? Well, number one, we have a lot more land, and there's a lot more opportunity. But in the South specifically, during the 1820s, 1830s, we are going to see the rise of King Cotton. And we've talked about that before, but King Cotton is going to become the economic stalwart of the United States, both North and South. So Jackson's goal during his presidency was to expand the Southwest. We would call it the Southeast today. It's those states down there like Georgia and Alabama and Tennessee and Arkansas, that territory right there. He wants to expand the land there to open it up to more Southern planters, to give us more opportunity to grow more cotton. Well, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 was designed to do just that. It's going to order the removal of the 5 civilized tribes from the region. Now, the 5 civilized tribes, they're there right there on the map, includes the Seminoles of southern Florida, also includes the Choctaw and Chickasaw, located primarily in the Mississippi region, and the Creek and the Cherokee. The Creek down between Alabama and Georgia, and the Cherokee primarily in Georgia. Well, the Indian removal policy of 1830 designated those 5 tribes for removal. And they were supposed to be moved from their traditional homeland to west of the Mississippi. And the idea was we're going to send them towards Oklahoma, modern-day Oklahoma. Now, the Choctaw and the Chickasaw are actually going to leave without any resistance. But the Cherokee and the Seminole, they're going to have another idea. The Seminole are going to resist physically. And that's going to lead to the Second Seminole War, which occurred in 1835. What's interesting is the First Seminole War, which occurred in the 18-teens, like around 1817, 1818, was also attributed to Andrew Jackson. The belief was that the Seminole Nation was hiding escaped slaves down in Florida, and Jackson and his troops were tasked with going into Florida to retrieve those slaves. That's going to spur this war between the United States and the Seminole Nation. What's interesting, though, is this was Spanish Florida. It wasn't the United States. It was Spanish Florida. And the First Seminole War basically showed Spain that they didn't have control of the area. And when the war comes to an end, that's about the same time that the Adams-Onis Treaty is being negotiated. And because Spain didn't want to have to deal with the Seminole Wars or anything like that, that's when they signed over Florida to the United States under that treaty. Now, the Cherokee took a different approach. Remember, I said that these were referred to as the 5 civilized tribes. One reason that they were referred that way is primarily because they had accepted some of the American ways of doing things. There were many in these 5 tribes who had accepted Christianity. The way they farmed was very similar to the American style of farming. The Cherokee had actually created a language, a written language and a constitution for their nation that was very similar to the U.S. Constitution. And that's why when they go ahead and decide to rebel against this, they do it in, I guess, quote, the American, quote, civilized way. They take the state of Georgia to court because Georgia is trying to force them off their land. Two major cases come out of that: Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia. I want to focus on Worcester versus Georgia. It's in that case that John Marshall and his court rule that the Cherokee Nation is an independent nation. So basically, it was a nation within a nation. We had a independent country living within the boundaries of the United States. But because they're an independent nation, he ruled, Georgia has no authority to move them. So their law does not apply to the Cherokee Nation. Well, Jackson's having none of that because remember, Jackson's goal was to create more farmland for Southern planters. So he ignores the federal court ruling. In fact, it's the legend is he basically said if John Marshall wants to rule, then John Marshall can come down and enforce that law because I'm not going to do it. Well, what this is eventually going to lead to, sadly, is the Trail of Tears. Now, the Trail of Tears was the forced removal of over 15,000 Cherokee natives and their movement to the Oklahoma Territory. Now, this didn't technically happen in Jackson's presidency. It occurred in 1838, which was under the presidency of Martin VanBuren. But it was Jackson's actions that led to the Trail of Tears. On this forced movement, thousands of Native Americans lost their lives. And this is the legacy that Jackson lives with to this day. Now, beyond the Native Americans, another major controversy during the Jackson presidency is his war with the National Bank, specifically the Second National Bank of the United States. If you remember correctly, in the 18-teens, right around 1816, the American system was implemented by James Madison, and part of the American system was the rechartering or the recreation of a national bank. So the Second National Bank of the United States was created, and it was chartered for 20 years, meaning that it was going to be in existence until 1836, and then it will require a renewal. Well, what's going to happen is Jackson sees the bank as a threat to the common man. He believed the bank was an opportunity for the rich to get richer, and so he's going to make it a personal war between him and the National Bank, and he vows to destroy the National Bank. He does this during the 1832 presidential election against Henry Clay. The National Bank, without a doubt, was the primary platform that both of these men were debating. Henry Clay kind of spurred this on because as a member of the House of Representatives, what he did was he actually tried to recharter the bank early. Remember, the initial charter was only supposed to last until 1836. He tried to renew it in 1832, and the legislature, the Congress, is going to approve it. They're going to pass it. But Jackson's having none of that. First of all, Jackson and many Democrats still believe that the National Bank was unconstitutional. We know that's not true because of the case of McCulloch versus Maryland. That's where John Marshall ruled not only that the bank was constitutional, but federal law was superior to state law. So Jackson, during the campaign, is going to vow to kill the bank because he said it just helps the rich get richer, and he's having none of that. And so when the bank charter comes across his desk, it's no doubt what he's going to do. He is going to veto it. And that's exactly what he did. He said, the bank is trying to kill me, but I'll show you. I'll kill it. And he vetoes it. So why? Why did he think that the bank was so bad? I mentioned that he thought it was helping the rich become richer. But what he really believed was that this power of banking, this financial power should be in the states. Remember, Democrats were about states' rights and more power in the state governments. When you make what we call a wordle of Jackson's veto message, creating a wordle, basically you put all the words into this computer-generated thingy-majiggy, and what it does is the larger words that show up on the screen are the words that are said the most within the speech. So in Jackson's veto message, when he's explaining why he vetoed the bank, look at the big words there: states, power, constitution, bank, government. He argues that this power should be within the states. And because he still does not believe that the bank is constitutional, that he needed to act. and he needed to make sure that this bank does not survive. This is the whole debate during the presidential campaign of 1832. And quite honestly, Jackson is still very popular among the American people. Henry Clay supports the bank. Andrew Jackson goes against the bank, and honestly, Jackson's going to end up winning this one. But he still has a bank that exists because that charter still is in play until 1836, the end of his presidency. So he's going to vow to kill the bank before it even gets to 1836. He is intent on destroying it. So what he's going to do under executive power, he's going to start withdrawing all the federal funds from the federal bank and start putting those funds in state-run banks. These are banks run by Democrats in the different states of the United States, and they got the nickname his pet banks, his favorite banks, kind of like a teacher's pet. This is kind of like Jackson's pet. It's the banks run in the states by Democrats. Now, the bank president, the national bank president at the time, Nicholas Biddle, to kind of, counteract what Jackson's doing, he's going to start calling in all the loans that the national bank has given out to try to keep the funds alive within the national bank. Well, what this is going to do is this is going to lead to widespread economic uncertainty and a bit of panic because all these loans are being called in. And so this is Jackson again taking on this bank, and each one of these heads represents a branch of the national bank, and he is willing to slay whichever ones he can. If you look right here in the middle of the screen, you're going to see Martin VanBuren, the vice president at the time, holding the heads of this monster for Jackson to slay. And the head he's actually holding on is John Quincy Adams, of all people. But anyway, this cartoon represents Jackson taking on the national bank. Here's another one showing his order to remove funds from the national bank and put them in state banks. And if you look at the left there, that little devil there in the middle of the screen, well, that's Nicholas Biddle running away from him. And the collapsing columns and stuff, I guess you could say that's the collapse of the national bank. Because, like I said, Jackson wanted to destroy this bank. But what this leads to is an economic collapse in the United States. As I mentioned, Biddle is going to call in all these loans, which causes a lot of uncertainty. Then, in order to try to maintain control, because what happens is states start issuing their own currency now, the government issues what's known as the Specie Circular. This is going to be issued in 1836, which basically said all public land in the United States can be purchased only with gold or silver. That's hard currency. Most people don't have gold and silver just laying around their house, and that's going to make it very difficult for, land purchases to go on and stuff like that. But those who do have the gold, they start buying up all this Western land. This is going to lead to the Panic of 1837. And this Panic of 1837 is very similar to a lot of other economic panics you will see in American history. One of the primary causes of the panic is going to be the over-speculation of Western lands. Speculation is one of those terms that is used with finance, which means that I am speculating that the price of land is just going to go up like crazy because it's going to be harder to buy since you have to have gold or silver. And since it's harder to buy, that should drive the price up. So a lot of people start speculating and buying the land thinking the price is going to rise. Well, what happens is the price is going to fall. Because no one's buying the land, we have excess lands available. And so all those people who bought land on speculation, they took out loans to pay for that land. And now the loans are coming due and they can't pay for it. That's going to lead to loans going into default. And when loans go into default, banks start closing. So that was one cause of the Panic of 1837. Another one is going to be this national bank battle. There was so much uncertainty with the economics of America, no one wanted to invest in America at this point. And so people are kind of holding on to their money and not investing to allow America to grow. And then finally, that Specie Circular, when that came out requiring hard currency for land purchases, that pretty much just did it in. And that's going to put our country into an economic depression for some time. And it's all Jackson's doing. This cartoon came out showing Jackson playing in the barnyard with all his friends and stuff. And honestly, this cartoon, what's funny about it is Jackson is portrayed as a jackass. And he kind of ran with that idea because he says, that's fine, I'll be the jackass of the barnyard. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the donkey became the national symbol for the Democratic Party. It wasn't like this conscious thing where Jackson said, hey, I'm going to make the donkey the symbol for our party. Instead, a very famous cartoonist by the name of Thomas Nast is actually going to create this representation. But he bases it on Jackson's word, and he bases it on this cartoon right here. A lot of people look at Jackson and they see him as more of a monarch than a president, because they said he overused his power of veto. I mean, look what he did with the bank, and look what he did with John Marshall and the Indian Removal Act. And in doing so, he was like trouncing on the U.S. Constitution. Jackson did use the veto a lot. In fact, he used the veto more in his 2 terms as president than any other president had before him. Now, we're only talking 6 presidents, but still, he absolutely used the power of veto to run the country in the way he saw fit. Jackson's seen as either a hero or a villain. He's seen as a hero to the common man because he did increase universal male suffrage. He got more people involved in the political process, and he did bring more democracy to our country. The villain side of him, you look no further than what happened to the Native Americans. Look at what happened to the National Bank and how that led us into economic depression. You can even make the argument about the nullification crisis, either hero or villain on that side. But regardless, he is a president that has long-lasting effects on our country. When you look at the election of 1832, you can see that Jackson held the majority of the electoral vote. I believe he also held the majority of the popular vote. But then when we go forward to the next election, 1836, Martin VanBuren is chosen by Jackson to be his heir apparent. And quite honestly, he rides the coattails of Jackson into the presidency. But notice we have a lot more candidates running. This is a result of Jackson and his policies and people wanting to overrun them or overturn them. This is when we see the creation of those 2 new parties in our country. We're now in a 2-party system. We're going where we have the Democrats and we have the Whigs. But so many people ran against VanBuren that they pretty much split up the vote, making it much easier for VanBuren to win. But what did VanBuren inherit? He's the 8th president of the United States. He's from New York. He was often known as the Little Magician. He kind of looks like Wolverine's grandfather. But what he inherited was a mess from the Andrew Jackson presidency. He had the economic panic of 1837. We're going to see another economic panic hit in 1839, which is just a continuation of the 37 panic. So it should be no surprise to you that Martin VanBuren's nickname? Martin Van Ruin. And that one sticks for a while. Moving forward in 1840, when Martin VanBuren tries to run for president again, he's going to go up against William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, of fame from the Battle of Tippecanoe and the fight against Tecumseh. He is going to run what's known as the Log Cabin Campaign. And what they're basically going to do is the Democrats are going to be beaten by the Whigs in their own game. They're going to appeal to the common man. They're going to portray Harrison as this common man, that he grew up in a log cabin, that he drinks hard cider. He doesn't drink wine or fancy liquor or anything like that, like Martin VanBuren does. He's one of the common man. And so basically what we start seeing is the Whigs are presenting the same platform, the same type of politics as the Democrats did when Jackson was running. And so the American people look and says, well, it kind of looks like Jacksonian democracy and it kind of smells like democracy, tastes like democracy. It must be democracy. And this log cabin campaign is working. I mean, again, we're kind of new still at popular campaigning, but look at these advertisements that came out. And, it shows William Henry Harrison, handing out hard cider to people, showing hospitality and stuff like that. And then they portray Martin VanBuren as this elite, rich, wealthy guy who has no idea what the common man wants. This cartoon is famous because it shows William Henry Harrison leading the train, the hard cider train, getting ready to knock over Martin VanBuren and his handsome cab. That's how the rich traveled, were in these very fancy horses and carriages, and, attacking him that way. And so when we get to the election of 1840, Harrison easily defeats VanBuren. Now, it's very hard to beat a president during an economic panic. And that's what VanBuren had. I don't think VanBuren stood a chance. Almost anybody could have run against him. He still got support in the West. He got support from Missouri and Arkansas and some of the southern states. But for the most part, Harrison is going to take the presidency. Now, what's interesting about Harrison, at the time, he was the oldest president ever elected by the United States populace. He also serves the shortest term. He will die 28 days into office. But we'll talk about that in the next video. Guys, that's it for Andrew Jackson. He had a huge effect on our country and what we are going to become, both good and bad. It's up to you to determine if he's a hero or villain. If you missed anything, as usual, you can watch this as many times as you want. But otherwise, we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.